Well, good morning. Open to Revelation 12, please. Revelation 12. We're going to cover 12, 13, and 14 in our class this morning. We're going to look at, as we look at these three chapters, really the third telling of what the outcome of this crisis is going to be for the early church in Asia Minor. Which is really the story of victory of God's people in all times. But he is speaking, of course, in particular about the present crisis that they are going through as they're suffering persecution. And God is giving, Jesus is giving to John and then to us these visions of what the ultimate outcome is going to be. We've seen already a picture that gives us a general view of what God's strategy is. There is going to be this unleashing of evil depicted by the four horsemen, and that what's going to happen with the release of those four horsemen is that mankind is going to be sorted into two camps. Those that are the kind of people that cling to the altar where the Lamb was slain, and those who are the kind of people that cling to the world. And so chapters 4 through 7 painted that picture of that first vision for us. Then in the second vision, we saw what are the weapons of the people of God. How do the followers of the Lamb, how do they address this enemy? And we saw three powers that they're going to exercise in their warfare. The power of prayer is depicted in chapters 8 and 9. The power of their testimony is depicted in chapters 10 and 11. And along with the power of their testimony is the power of their suffering, of how they have a ministry that is like the ministry of their leader. The Lamb of God suffered for the sins of the world, and the outcome of this for them is that they're going to suffer like He did. And so there's the depiction of a ministry that is the same length of time as His ministry, 3.5 years or 42 months or 1,260 days. Not that literally that would be the time of their suffering, but just showing their identification with their Savior. They are going to suffer for the sins of the world the same way that Jesus did. And so the power of prayer, the power of their testimony, and the power of their suffering all together are their weapons, and that the use of those weapons is going to result in the redemption of people. And so we saw this picture of this great redemption that took place at the end of chapter 11, or close to the end of chapter 11, really beginning about verse 11 and following, of how all of that ended. And it ended with the conversion of people who were witnesses to their prayers and to their preaching and to their suffering. And then it also ended with the fact that these prayers and this preaching and this suffering are part of how they become the kind of people that God set out from the beginning to create. This is a part of His purpose of how they come to have the same kind of heart that is the kind of heart that the Lamb has. And so they come to have for the world and for God's purpose this same kind of heart and passion for the redemption of the world the same way that the Lamb does. And all of that happens through the accomplishment of this purpose. And so that's the picture that we have in chapters 8 through 11, are these three weapons and how they're exercised and what the outcome will be. Now what we see in chapters 12, 13, and 14 is a window inside the enemy's camp. Who is this enemy? What's behind all of this wickedness that's been unleashed? What's the backstory of the enemy? And what we find here is that backstory. We're going to be introduced into three characters who are all conspiring together against God and against His people. And really, one of those is the mastermind. The other two are really just pawns. The mastermind who is behind all of this is the villain that's depicted in chapter 12. And it's the picture of a dragon, a red dragon. A red dragon who has 7 heads. A red dragon who has 7 heads and who has 10 horns. A red dragon who has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns or diadems on his heads that all depict the fact that he is powerful and has authority. A red dragon with 7 heads and 7 crowns and 10 horns and a tail with which he knocks down 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. And so there is this picture painted of this huge and horrific and powerful villain. We're introduced to his sidekicks, really, in chapter 13. And there are 2 of them. One of them is a beast that comes out of the sea, and the other is a beast that arises from the earth. The first beast, as we'll see in a little bit, looks a lot like the dragon. He's got the same number of heads. He's got the same number of horns. He's crowned. And so he looks a little bit like, he's kind of a miniature of the dragon. But he's got some other things that make him different, and the fulfillment of some prophecies that particularly found in Daniel chapter 7. And so there's a beast that comes up out of the sea, and then there's a beast that comes up out of the earth. And this beast that comes up from the earth is really about getting people to be impressed with the beast that came up out of the sea. He's really a bit of a publicity agent. He does a sort of a marketing campaign for getting people to be impressed with the beast that came up out of the sea. And so those are these 3 creatures, the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth, are a part of this conspiracy against the people of God. But really the mastermind behind it all is the dragon. He is plainly revealed to us. He's unmasked for us in verse 9 of chapter 12, where we're just plainly told who the dragon is. In verse 9 of chapter 12 it says, "And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who's called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." And then it talks about a voice saying that now there is salvation and power in the kingdom of our God, and goes on to talk about the victory that came as a result of the throwing down of the dragon. So the dragon's no mystery to us. He's the one who's always been the opponent of God's people. And that's part of the purpose here in chapter 12, in giving us the backstory of the enemy. Jesus is revealing to us that this isn't a new enemy, and that the present crisis that the followers of the Lamb are facing is really an age-old crisis. What we are seeing is the climax of a conflict that dates all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, when Eve was tempted and when she was deceived in the garden. And so that's the reason why the opponent of the dragon in chapter 12 is a woman. And so we're first introduced to this woman, and then we're introduced to the dragon, who is waiting for the woman to give birth because she's a pregnant woman. So she's expecting a child. And so the dragon is standing opposite of the woman, and he's waiting for her to give birth because he's going to devour her child. And so what's being depicted here is the fact that what we are seeing right now in the crisis of the early church is this culmination or this climax of this conflict that goes all the way back when Satan deceived Eve, and then a curse was pronounced on him, that he would bruise the heel of her seed, but her seed would do what? Would crush him, would bruise his head. And so in chapter 12, there's a depiction of how that promise, that curse upon the serpent, which was really a promise to mankind, is now about to be, or is now being fulfilled. And so here's an expectant woman, and she's depicted in at least 3 ways. Tell us something about who she is. She's crowned with 12 stars. And what does 12 remind us of? The 12 apostles, the 12 tribes. I mean, that's in either covenant. It's the number that pertains to the people of God, to those that are the followers of God. These are His people. We saw in the last chapter how God's people were depicted as a temple, and how they were depicted as 2 witnesses who were Moses-like and Elijah-like. And here the people of God are depicted as a woman. And that picture is going to be used again. Later on in the book, instead of an expectant mother, the woman is going to be a bride. And at the very end of the book, she is going to be presented to Christ, her husband. Now, don't confuse those images, or it really gets kind of messy with a woman who gives birth to a son who ends up becoming her husband. That's not what you're supposed to see. Just the idea of the people of God being depicted as a woman is the thing that we're to see here. And so she wears the number of the people of God, and everything about her is light. She is a woman who is triumphant over darkness. And we see that in the way that she's adorned, because she wears the sun as her cloak. And she's crowned with stars, which are also luminaries. And she's not clothed with the moon, she stands on the moon. The moon is her footstool. And so everything about her says that she has been triumphant over darkness. The dragon is quite the opposite. He is the distiller of darkness. And so he sweeps stars out of the sky with his tail. He is one who's all about darkness, but she stands in opposition to him. And we are intended to see that this doesn't look like it's a fair fight, because you've got this 7-headed red dragon who is opposing a woman, and a woman who is with child, and not only with child, she's experiencing labor pains, and so she's about to give birth. And so it doesn't look like it's going to be a fair fight at all. And so here, this woman who is triumphant over light, who represents the people of God, is living both in the pain and the expectation of delivering a son who is going to deliver her from the dragon. And so we see how the people of God for ages have been waiting for this curse to come about, this promise to see fulfillment, the promise of a son, a seed that would be a victor, that would be a deliverer. And so as the stories unfold, the woman gives birth to the son, and we're not even told the story of his crucifixion. All we're told is that he was called up to heaven, and that he received authority to rule the nations. And so the only picture that's given is not of his suffering. The picture that's given is a picture of his immediate victory. The dragon was waiting there to devour the son, and his plan was foiled. The son was elevated to a position of authority. Now he rules over the nations. And so we've just had, in a nutshell, the whole story of the Bible depicted in the image of this expectant mother who opposes the dragon. It might seem a little odd that Satan is depicted here as a dragon, but remember how the tempter appeared first in the garden? Did he crawl on his belly when it all began? Now, that was part of the curse, right? That on his belly he would go. I don't know what he looked like. I don't know what he was like when he was in the garden and when he first approached Eve. But I think that's part of the imagery that's being borrowed here, is that he was something more, something grander, and he was abased by his tempting of mankind. He was cast down. And so he's depicted here as a dragon, but he's a dragon that's going to fall. And so in that image of a dragon, I don't know if John saw feet. I don't know if he saw wings. I don't know if he saw both. But it's the depiction of a creature that was intended to inspire with his power and 7 heads. He's full of all this worldly wisdom, but he is defeated by an infant, by a child that is born, who is the promised seed that God said would be victorious. And so he is here. The dragon in chapter 12 is not just defeated once, he's actually defeated 3 times. And so after the elevation of the son, the second picture that's painted in chapter 12 is of this warfare that goes on in heaven. Michael the archangel is having a war with the dragon in heaven, and there's no place for the dragon. He's cast out of heaven. And not only is he cast out of heaven, but so are all of his angels. And I think the point of the vision is just to show how It's intended to communicate to us the reality and the drama of the change that came about with the resurrection and the ascension of Christ. It shook up the forces of Satan. It was a defeat. It was a conquest. It was his undoing. He was bound. He was fallen as a consequence of the fulfillment of this promise of Christ being elevated. And so it's communicating to us the reality of what went on in the spiritual realm as a result of Jesus being crucified and as a result of his ascent into heaven. It made a difference in a big and a cosmic way. And so it's explaining to us, again, this is the backstory of the enemy. This is what's happened that is now resulted in the present crisis. What does an enemy do when he gets beat down? And he's not an enemy that's going to give up. He just gets more desperate, right? He just gets more, he just looks for another avenue for to be victorious. And that's the picture that's being painted here in chapter 12, is of the fact that the serpent is losing and he's not giving up. And so everything that he's tried to do to spoil the purposes of God, everything he's tried to do has always been foiled. And so it was foiled when he wanted to destroy the coming Messiah. That didn't work. And now he's been cast out of heaven. And so the only thing he knows to do is to go and attack the people that brought this child into the world. And so he goes after the woman. And the same number that was used back in the previous couple of chapters to talk about this period of suffering that the people of God are going to undergo, this period of testing, gets used here again. And so the woman flees into the wilderness from the dragon, and that's where the people of God, that's often how a period of testing is described. When Israel came out of the land of Egypt, where did they go? They went into the wilderness. That was a place of testing. Same picture is used in the prophets when they talked about their suffering when they were in captivity. It was another time of being in the wilderness. The woman here, she flees into the wilderness away from the serpent. And the serpent, he vomits up a river to drown the woman. And the earth opens up and swallows the water. And so it's an obstacle that's like the obstacle that Israel faced when they came out of Egypt. They were faced with a sea. God parted the water and they walked through. And so it's not an exact duplicate of what happened there, but it's the same kind of thing. That there is a river that the serpent vomits up and to wash away the woman, to drown her, and God saves her from the river. She's given the wings of an eagle and she flies away. And so she's rescued from the dragon. So 3 times the dragon is foiled. He's foiled when he tries to devour the child. He's cast out of heaven. And then in his early efforts to destroy the people of God, he fails in that. And so now what we have at the end of chapter 12 is a really mad dragon. He's really mad. And so what happens in chapter 13 is now what he does next. He's failed 3 times, but he's not given up. And so he's going to raise up other agents to help him in his warfare against the people of God. Any questions or any comments so far in what we looked at in chapter 12? Any questions about any part of the text there, or any confusion about the images that are depicted there? We're going to see another lady a little bit later on in the book when we get to chapter 17. There's going to be another woman that's depicted, and I just want to prepare you for that, is that we've seen the people of God depicted as a woman. We're going to see the enemy depicted as a woman too. And there are 2 different women. There's the woman who is the lady of light here in chapter 12. There's going to be a woman who's a lady of the night when we get to chapter 17, because the enemy is depicted as a prostitute. And so you could say that you've got the Lady and the Tramp in the book of Revelation. And that's intended to say something about the character of these two camps of people, these two communities. We've already seen that dichotomy, that separation of humanity into two communities, and that kind of picture is going to continue through the rest of the book. And so we're introduced to one lady here, we're going to be introduced to another lady later. We've been introduced to one seal, how the people of God were sealed with the name of God when they were counted back in chapter 7. There's going to be a sealing that takes place of people who are in this other camp. They also are going to receive a name or a number on their forehead that's indicative of who they're loyal to. And so we're going to see a lot of this sort of separation of people into two camps. And so the picture that's depicted here is one of God's people as being a woman. Notice, though, how she's depicted at the end of chapter 12. In verse 17 it says, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus." I know it seems kind of confusing when you're looking at imagery like this, but I want you to see that the people of God are both the woman and they are the offspring. And it's just two ways of looking at the same promise. In looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, Eve and all of her descendants are, in the birthing of children, there is this hope that there's going to be a child that's born who is going to make mankind victorious over the serpent. But now that the promised one has come, now we are depicted as his brothers, as his sisters, as those that are the offspring of the promise, of those that are the children of the promise. And so now the dragon is making war against her offspring. And so the people of God are depicted in both ways. From before the promise, they are the expectant woman. But now that Jesus has come, now they are children together with him, his brothers and sisters, who are going to share in the victory. Because it's not just the promise that the seed would trample the head of the serpent is not just a promise just for Jesus. It's a promise that the people of God share in. Satan is going to be crushed under our feet. That promise was given to the church at Rome at the end of the epistle to Rome in chapter 16. Paul says to them something to the effect of, may God soon crush Satan under your feet. And so that's a promise that we share in, this promise of victory. We're going to see how that's depicted in this section, because when we get to chapter 14, we're going to see those who stand with the Lamb as victors over the dragon. Those who together with Jesus are going to crush Satan and crush those who are allied with him. Okay, let's talk about chapter 13. So we've got a frustrated dragon. Everything he's tried to do to spoil the purposes of God has resulted in ruin. So that's the backstory. And so what's he going to do now? Well, he stands on the shore of the sea. And there is this beast that comes up out of the sea. The first thing I want you to notice about the beast is that he looks like the dragon, and we've already alluded to that. And so we're told that this beast that comes up out of the sea has 10 horns. The dragon has 10 horns. The beast that comes up out of the sea has 7 heads. And he also has diadems. They are depicted here as being on his horns rather than being on his head, the way they are on the dragon. But I just want you to see that the picture here is the one of a beast who is a look-alike for the dragon. And I think part of that is for us to see in that is the vanity of Satan in terms of raising up an empire that is a tribute to him and to his ego and to his evil and to his devices. But also to see that, what are the people of God against all of the politics that are going on in the world? I mean, we don't don't look so mighty. We don't look so fierce. We don't look so daunting in front of all of the nations and the kings and the presidents and the senates and all the powers that be. But the picture that's being depicted for us here, and especially when you live under a government where there's a tyrannical ruler, where there is one emperor and he's in power. But the picture that's depicted for us here is that this government that is so evil and that is so wicked is just a puppet. It's just a puppet. It's just a puppet for Satan. And so he's the one that's behind all of this. And we know what the outcome is going to be, because God promised it in the beginning that He would crush the serpent. So we know how this is going to end. And so he is awful looking, the dragon. And the beast is intimidating, but don't be fooled, because there is a dragon that's behind the beast that is causing all this to happen. The second thing I want you to notice about the way that the beast is depicted is that he's the fulfillment of a promise that we looked at really when we started the book of Revelation back in Daniel chapter 7. There's really two pictures in Daniel that are pictures that are fulfilled here. One is the vision that Daniel interprets, the dream that's of the image that's made up of the 4 different kinds of materials, that has the head that's of gold and the chest that's made of bronze or rather silver, and the hips and thighs that are made of bronze, and then the feet and calves that are made of clay mixed with iron. And then in chapter 7 of Daniel, those same 4 world empires that were going to come to pass. And the reason we know they're empires is because 3 of them were announced in the book of Daniel. 2 of them Daniel lived through. He lived to see the Babylonian Empire rise and fall, and he lived to see the rise of the Persian Empire. He died during the period of the Persian rule, but the 3rd empire was plainly depicted or plainly told to be Greece. And so we have Babylon, we have Persia, we have Greece, and then the next empire that followed, the conquest of Alexander the Great and the spread of Hellenism or of Greek culture, was the coming of Rome. And so we're prepared for how that vision was to be fulfilled in Daniel 2 and in Daniel 7. And so part of what's depicted here in Daniel chapter 13 is a fulfillment of that prophecy that was made to Daniel, so that we know who the beast is. The beast is Rome. But when we look at Daniel 7, the beast is a little mysterious. Babylon was described as looking like a lion, and Persia was described as looking like a bear, and Greece was depicted as looking like a leopard. But all that was told about the next mysterious beast that came up was that it had feet and claws like iron, and that it was terrifying, and that it would trample the whole earth. Well, in Revelation 13, the mystery beast, we now see. It comes fully into the light, and so we see it fully depicted. And we've already seen the fact that why it was terrifying. It had 7 heads, and it had 10 horns, and it had crowns. But we also see that it's a combination of all these empires that went before it. And the empires are described in reverse order. And so we're told, first of all, verse 2, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. So there were elements of Greece that are in this beast. And it had feet like those of a bear. And so there are elements of Persia. And it has a mouth like a lion. And so this beast is a bit of a Frankenstein. It's these bits and pieces of other kingdoms that have all been sewn together. And that's what Satan has worked, and what has emerged with Rome is this combination beast. And if you know much about Roman culture and about how Rome how it came into its empire. It's really a true depiction, because they were not so much innovators as they were synthesizers of culture. They used Greek art and Greek culture in order to solidify their empire. It worked for Alexander the Great. It worked even better for them. And I think part of the picture is not just what their strategy was in conquest, but just how this empire that has emerged in Rome is the zenith, it's the apex of all the things that are wrong with humanity when humanity abandons God. Man becomes impressed with himself, with his wealth, with his wisdom, with his culture, with his philosophy, with his immoralities. He becomes inventive and ingenious in that. And so what was allowed to happen or to flourish in Rome is just godless man gone to seed. And he looks like Satan when he's impressed with himself, and when he's absorbed with selfishness, and when he lives a life of abandon. And so that's what this empire is. It represents how all of that has flourished and what it's grown into. And it's ugly. It's a Frankenstein. And it's a Frankenstein that looks a lot like the dragon. Not only is this beast a look-alike for Satan and a Frankenstein beast, but he is really impressed with himself. And so he wears blasphemous names. And when we looked at some of the coinage, we looked at some of the statues of what had happened with the Roman emperors and with even the whole Roman society's celebration of itself. And so Caesar was called Lord, and he was called Savior because he saved the world. And he is depicted as Son of God and as God. And Domitian insisted on being called Lord God Caesar. And so there's blasphemy in the way in which these emperors speak of themselves. The Roman culture saw itself as being the deliverer of mankind and of living in this golden age that they had brought to the world. And so it was there was a lot of arrogance and a lot of blustering and a lot of boasting about what they had become. And again, what's behind all of this, the middle of verse 2, the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. And so Satan doesn't mind letting man feel like he is somebody and he is something, so long as it means that he is in control of that. And so he lets man feel like he's something great. That's part of his seduction, but he's the one that's really pulling the strings. Now look, if you would, at verse 3, because this alludes to one of the things that happened in this time that seemed to be one of the ways in which mankind was seduced by the awesomeness, the aura of Rome. It says, "And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed, and followed after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?'" When you read about a creature that looks as if it's been slain, what does that remind you of? That we've already seen in the book. Yeah. I mean, Jesus was the lamb that was slain. But now we have a picture of a beast that has a head that looks as if it's been slain. We're going to see something with the next beast about how that beast looks a bit like a lamb. Truth is, or rather, deception, false religion, false doctrine, even worldly even worldly things can have the appearance of being of legitimacy. And that's part of what makes it so deceptive, is the fact that there's this marrying of truth and error, this of truth and lies, of truth and deception. And one of the things that happened in with Rome, particularly with Nero, was the notion that there had been some kind of resurrection that took place. Nero took his own life. He committed suicide. But there weren't any witnesses to that, and there was a kind of a myth that went around that Nero didn't really die, that Nero was still alive. Think about how many popular, whether you're talking about music stars or pop icons or whatever, that there's the notion that they didn't really die. That there ends up becoming some kind of myth or legend surrounding their person, that people see them wherever, and that there was some kind of conspiracy and it didn't really happen. Well, there was a myth surrounding Nero that went on after Nero's death, that Nero didn't really die, that Nero was still alive. It really became popularized when Domitian became emperor. In fact, because Domitian acted so much like Nero. They had the same kind of ego. They had the same kind of relentlessness, viciousness toward any kind of opponent. They had the same kind of celebration of self and arrogance, same kind of flamboyance. And so a lot of people saw Domitian as being, there was a popular myth that Domitian was Nero resurrected, Nero revived. Another thing that happened between Nero and Domitian is that the empire went through a crisis. There was about a year and a half when there was a quick succession of emperors. There were 3 different emperors just within the space of 18 months. And all of them, none of them died a natural death. All of them were killed by somebody else in some kind of conspiracy. And so it looked as if the empire was really vulnerable, but then it came back with another strong ruler and then persisted for a lot longer. I think part of what's being depicted here is that phenomenon that happened, that it looked like this beast was going to die, but the beast didn't die. One of its heads was slain, but then the slain head came back to life again. And so I think this is an allusion either to that popular myth or to the fact that Rome, there have been times where it looked like Rome was going to fall, but Rome didn't fall, which only made people more impressed with Rome's power and more impressed with the security that they found in Rome, because it seemed as if Rome was an invincible empire and that its emperor was invincible. All of that whole idea of the resurrection or the immortality of their kings was all depicted in their coinage again, and in their popular myths. That Julius Caesar, when he died, that he ascended and became a god, and that happened with each of these emperors. And so this was, I think, part of what's being talked about here is all of that mythology that was a part of popular culture that just made people believe more and more in the immortality of the emperors and in the invincibility of Rome. And so they said things like, this would be the popular sentiment of the times, who is like the beast? And who is able to wage war with him? I tell you, we need to be careful about that in our country, because there can be this kind of popular, what nation is like our nation? We are the greatest nation ever. We're the nation that has the greatest values. In God we trust. And there can be this sort of popular notion or sentiment that somehow we are the best ever. And that was kind of what went on with Rome, is that they really regarded themselves as being as being something great. So who is like the beast and who's able to wage war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies and authority to act for 42 months. We have that same number again, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. The point is his time is limited, and his time is the time when he is going to do all of his horrific things is going to be when the people of God shine in their ministry like the Savior. And so he has authority for 42 months, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. I want you to see how we're depicted, the people of God. There's going to be something said about those that dwell on earth. The people of God are depicted as those that dwell in heaven. And so even though they live on earth, they are not earth dwellers. We are heaven dwellers. And so he is, but he's blaspheming those that are heaven dwellers. And it was given him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. And so this is the habit of the beast that comes out of the sea. This is how he's going to extend his rule and his authority. This is what he's going to do to the people of God. Any questions about that picture? Okay, look at the next beast. Verse 11, and I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. Now, I think we are to see in the picture of this beast the combination of an imitation lamb, but this imitation lamb sounds like a dragon. And I want you to see the silliness. Now, I don't think it's intended to be silly, but I just want you to see that John or Jesus is describing for us here that this is all just a sideshow. This is not real. He's showing us who's really behind this. And what we have is a dragon who's a ventriloquist. And the dragon has this puppet lamb that has 2 horns that he is using to deceive mankind. But we know that it's not the lamb, the Lamb of God. We know that this is a dragon wearing a sheepskin. And we hear the voice of the dragon when he speaks. And so he sees a beast that comes up out of the earth. It has 2 horns like a lamb. It speaks like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. And so we've got a beast that has become kind of the publicity agent, the promoter of the beast that comes up out of the sea. And I think what's being depicted here is how the worship of the emperor all grew up around the aura of Rome. And that was particularly going on in Asia Minor, where you had priests and you had temples and you had altars that all became sanctuaries where the worship of the Roman gods and particularly the worship of the Roman emperor was practiced. And so you had those that were promoters of it who were promoting it for their own gain because it meant that they made nice with Rome, that they accorded the favor of the Roman emperors and of the Roman citizenry, and at the same time became upwardly mobile because they were the practitioners and the promoters of this emperor worship around the empire, and that especially took place in Asia Minor. And so they are depicted as lamb-like, because it's a false religion. And it's borrowing the trappings of true religion, but it's all the dragon that's behind it, and it's all about seducing mankind into this worship of really a man. And so he exercises all the authority of the first beast. He makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. And so they spread this myth about the emperor being resurrected. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. It's just showing the fact that they worked signs that are like the Elijah-like wonders that we saw a bit earlier, that come when the people of God pray. This beast is able to make fire come down from heaven. He deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life again. And we've already seen early in our study all of the imagery, all of the statuary, all of the shrines that were raised up for the worship of the emperor. And there was given to him, verse 15, there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. You can go on Wikipedia or you can go on Google or whatever, and you can look up emperor worship in Rome. And one of the things that was characteristic of that was making images that were impressive because they could move and they could talk. So they could make statues do things. Smoke comes out of their nose, or they would have they would build these windpipes that would go through the statues so that somebody could stand, way back, and they could talk through it, and you could ask what you needed to do about your problem, or ask for a prophecy or whatever, and then somebody could speak, or they might do something like in the oracle at Delphi. There was supposed to be a serpent that lived in a hole that would give prophecies. And so somebody would hiss and make sounds, and then you'd have a prophetess who understood the sounds of the hissing, and so she could tell you what the meaning of the hissing was in response to your quest for some kind of prophecy. And so that was part of the whole aura and mythology. It was this kind of, Disney kind of tricking of making images that looked like they were speaking and doing and were animated, but all as a part of propagating the religion of the times. And there would even be, as the chapter goes on, some sanctions against those who refuse to worship the emperor. And so you might not be able to buy produce in the marketplace. You might not be able to participate in the guild of those who are coppersmiths or whatever, unless you do something to acknowledge your allegiance to Rome and to the emperor by offering some kind of sacrifice or some kind of incense or something that shows that you are submissive to the powers that be. And so it speaks of how people were given the mark on their forehead or on their hands, and when they worshipped the beast, or when they bowed down to it. And it says that the mark was what? 666, which is the number of a man. Lots of ink has been spilt about the whole idea of the mark of the beast and the number there. One popular suggestion is that it's a reference to Nero, by taking numerology, where you take a letter, like the letter A in our alphabet, and you assign it a number 1, and B a number 2, and C a number 3, and then you add up the numbers. And so one of the arguments is that when you do that with Nero's name in Hebrew, then you end up with the number 666. I really think that the meaning of the number is simpler than that. The sixth day is when God created man. He created man on the sixth day. And here we have 3 sixes, 6 3 times. And the point that's made when that number is introduced is that it's the number of a man. Do you see that in that verse 18? Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. I think the point simply is, listen folks, don't be caught up in this. Don't be mesmerized. Don't be deceived. The emperor is just a man. He's just a man. He's not a god. He's not the son of a god. He's just a man. And say it 3 times. He's a man, he's a man, he's a man. That's all he is. And those who have any sense about them, any wisdom, see that this is not real. It's the dragon who's behind it all. That's what's going on. And so don't be caught up in this deception. Okay. we'll have to stop there, and we'll look at how that's resolved in chapter 14. Thank you all.